Week 3 of the 2024 NFL season is in the books. Was not quite as weird as week 2, but still entertaining nonetheless. So, just like I had the first 2 weeks, I'm going to go over my quick thoughts for each team and each game. So, here we go. Starting with Thursday night football, let's start with the Jets. The Jets needed this one pretty badly. Obviously, a good win in Tennessee last week, but you really needed to solidify your season at home against a bitter rival in the Patriots that has gotten the best of you for the last 20 years, basically, and they did just that. Aaron Rodgers had his best game, not only of the season, but possibly of the last 2 or 3 seasons, and so the Jets look like they are on their way to being a playoff team, and they may even compete to win this division if the Bills kind of start to fall off a little bit, which obviously they may, given their offensive talent level. But regardless, back to the Jets. They look like they will be just fine, that they may compete for a playoff spot. The only thing that I will say negative is Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers do need to get more on the same page. Those two look like they were just a hair off for most of the game. They did have that touchdown connection, which was a perfect throw from Aaron Rodgers, but outside of that, they didn't look all that great. But good on the Jets. Meanwhile, on the Patriots side, the offensive line looks like if you were to have taken a bunch of kids from a community college, not even football players, just a bunch of kids, random guys, could be girls, could be whatever, and just threw them out there and said, you know what, go for it. I believe in you, kid. You can do it. Well, guess what? They can't do it. They're terrible. Please keep Drake May away from this absolute disaster of an offensive line for as long as humanly possible. Thank you so much. Moving on to the New York Football Giants. The Giants really needed this game. They have honestly not looked great this year at all. They really needed a game like this to kind of get their season off the ground. And man, it is really amazing how much a number one wide receiver, can do for you if you are just any football team. Because Malik Nabers has completely transformed this offense. Obviously, they looked absolutely atrocious in Week 1, but in Weeks 2 and Week 3, Malik Nabers has carried that offense, and he did so again in Week 3. Now, of course, he didn't carry it quite as much as he did in Week 2, and this time it obviously resulted in a win. Daniel Jones looked a little bit better, and the defense did just enough to have them win this game. So congratulations, New York Football Giants. You have one of the few positives that are going to happen for you this season. It's possible that the Giants actually did find some kind of formula where they could be successful long-term this season. Or it's possible that they were just playing the god-awful Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns may very well be the most inconsistent team in all of football and may be for the rest of the season. After a complete, awesome, put-it-all-together win where Deshaun Watson looked great against the Jaguars, immediately the next week they look absolutely terrible against a team that is arguably worse than the Jaguars. This is just another stark reminder that Deshaun Watson is being paid $240 million to be terrible. Moving on to the Malik Willis Bowl, let's start with the team Malik Willis plays for now, the Green Bay Packers. Malik Willis, he looked pretty good in this one. Didn't look special, didn't look fantastic, but was pretty good. And because the Titans defense didn't really play all that well, he didn't really have to be anything other than pretty good. And the Titans do have a phenomenal defense, so it was a little bit surprising to see them not play so great, but there's a lot of other factors that go into it. But regardless, Malik Willis didn't have to be incredible on Sunday. He just had to be good enough, and he was plenty good enough for the Packers to escape with a win. I know I said there are a lot of factors in the Titans losing this weekend and the fact that they have been losing. The main culprit is really Will Levis continues to turn the ball over. Another 3 turnovers on Sunday, including a pick 6 to Jair Alexander, which congratulations, Jair. One of the best DBs in football, and he finally gets his first career pick 6, so congrats to Jair. But regardless, if Will Levis continues to turn the ball over, it may not be much longer that they're going to continue to put him out there. They went with him as the starting quarterback last year. They traded Malik Willis away. They released Ryan Tannehill. So it is Will Levis. That is it. There is nobody else that is going to be really all that good for the Titans this year. But again, if he continues to play this poorly and waste a top 5 defense in the NFL, he's going to have a pretty short leash here soon if he doesn't turn things around. The defense only gave up 23 points this week, and The problem with that is, unless you give up 20 points or less, you have a 0% chance of winning with Will Levis at quarterback. That is what the Tennessee Titans are finding out. And if that continues to be the case, and he continues to just turn the ball over and give the other offense extra possessions over and over again, the Titans may go 0-17. They probably won't go 0-17, but they may, again, unless Will Levis or someone else turns that offense around and actually allows them to be competent, at least for a week or two. Moving on to the Bears and Colts, two very young, upstart, exciting quarterbacks. Let's start with your victors in that, the Indianapolis Colts. After a kind of not great week last week for the Colts, they bounced back nicely this week. Now, AR-15 didn't play all that great, but he played well enough to win against a really, really good defense. So good for the Colts. I do still think that they are going to be good enough to push for a playoff spot, but only time will tell if they can be consistent enough to get there. Oh, and shout out to the defense for the Colts, who had definitely had their most complete game of the season so far, and they are kind of solidifying themselves as maybe a sneaky top 10 defense in the NFL. The Bears' offense looked a little bit better this weekend, but unfortunately 3 more turnovers for Caleb Williams, and that pretty much derailed any momentum the Bears were trying to build during the game. For me, the most troubling aspect of the Bears right now, though, is the play of DeAndre Swift. 1.8 yards per carry for the first 3 weeks is nothing to really get super concerned about yet, because it's only 3 games, and some running backs do get off to slow starts, but it is a bit concerning. You paid $24 million, $8 million a year over 3 years for DeAndre Swift to be your bell cow running back, and 1.8 yards per carry is just not good enough. The defense is good enough. The offensive line, the running game, and even the passing game right now is not good enough, and they are wasting a good opportunity right now in Chicago unless they could turn things around. All right, one of the more intriguing games of the weekend, if not one of the more boring games, given its blowout nature. Vikings and Texans. Let's start with the victors, the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings honestly look like they may be the very best team in the NFL right now. And no, folks, I'm not joking. They really may be the best team in the NFL right now. Their resume so far, they've beaten 2 of the top teams in the NFL over the last 2 weeks, albeit the 49ers did have a lot of injuries, although the week that the Vikings played them, the only major injury was Christian McCaffrey to start the game, and they still were able to pull out the win. And then, of course, this week, they beat the Texans 34-7. This is a blowout of one of the favorites in the AFC to go to the Super Bowl, and so, honestly, right now, I don't see the Vikings slowing down. Sam Darnold looks every bit as good as I think he possibly could be given his circumstances, and honestly, I could not be happier for him. I was one of those guys that thought that Sam Darnold should have gone number 1 overall when he got drafted back in, I think, 2014, something like that. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but regardless, I am just so happy for Sam Darnold. I hope that this continues, but even if it all goes up in smoke tomorrow and he blows out both of his knees and this is all we ever get of Sam Darnold, I'm just happy that he got to taste being a successful quarterback for a few weeks, and I truly hope that his success continues, and who knows what happens maybe even next year in Minnesota if he keeps playing like this with J.J. McCarthy coming back. Who knows? But focusing on the now, I'm happy for Sam Darnold, and I hope his success continues. And for the Texans, honestly, I wouldn't really worry too much about this game. You ran into a kind of a buzzsaw. The Vikings are the best team in football right now, as I stated earlier, and you were undefeated going into this. It's just one of those things where you go on the road, you face a great team, and sometimes things just don't go your way. CJ Stroud didn't play great. The entire offense really didn't play great, and neither did the defense. It was just kind of a complete team collapse for one game, but these games are going to happen. You're most likely not going to go undefeated. That's just how things go. The only team that's ever done it in the regular season are the Dolphins and, of course, the Patriots back in 2007. So it's one of those things where, you know, it's just probably not going to happen. And so if I'm the Texans, I shake this off, I brush it off. You go back next week and you beat the ever-living crap out of the Jaguars to get yourself back on track. And I hope they do, because they've got 6 weeks where they're playing a lot of really, really difficult defenses. They play the Lions, they play the Jets, they play the Patriots, they play the Packers. They play a lot of really, really good defenses over the next 6 weeks. So they really got to turn things around next week against a team that basically is just waiting to be put out of their misery. Moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles. After a tough loss to the Falcons last week at home, they bounced back nicely with a victory against the Saints here. Man, they must be thinking they're lucky stars that the Giants don't have any idea how to run a franchise and let Saquon Barkley go to a division rival, because Saquon is clearly their best player right now. I know he got some flack for dropping that ball on third down, but that shouldn't take away for the unbelievable start that Saquon has gotten off to this season, and also the complete way he has unlocked that offense as their bell cow running back. And that's the New Orleans Saints we all know and love. All of their offensive firepower completely evaporated in this one after getting off to such a hard start the first 2 weeks. Their breakout star in Rashid Shaheed had 0 catches for 0 yards and also 0 rushes for 0 yards. He was a complete and utter non-factor, and I mean that literally. Zeros across the board. And unfortunately, while their defense is playing fantastic, Derek Carr looked completely inept for the first time all season. Now, it's only week 3, and you've had 2 good weeks, so it's nothing to really get crazy scared about, but the Eagles' defense is a defense that can be exploited in the pass game, and the Saints just did not do that. But again, with how good the defense has been playing this year, if the offense is even slightly below average, they could be above 500 by the end of the season with how good their defense is. Steelers and Chargers, the battle of the mid-offenses, and we'll start with the Steelers. Okay, look, I'm very happy for Justin Fields. I am. I love Justin Fields. I'm an Ohio State fan. I was a big fan of Justin Fields coming out of the draft. I thought he was going to be the guy to break the Ohio State quarterback curse. Unfortunately, Chicago doesn't know what the heck they're doing. But I'm hoping that this season allows people to realize exactly how good Justin Fields actually is, because he's not playing fantastic, but obviously he is doing just enough for this team to win. But I will say, at least this game made sense. I always get upset that the Steelers win because they continue to be outgained yardage-wise, but they actually thoroughly outgained the Chargers in this one, and they just thoroughly outplayed the Chargers in this one. So I have no problem with this win because they deserved it. See? I'm a fair guy. Good job, Steelers. And like I said, the Chargers just got thoroughly outplayed. This was a rough one for them. They couldn't run, they couldn't pass, and surprisingly, a guy who's widely considered a top 10 quarterback in football in Justin Herbert could not pull them out of it at all. They don't really have the best weapons in the world on offense. Quentin Johnson is really their number 1, which is terrifying. But regardless, you would expect a guy like that to, you know, if the running game's not working like it had been the last couple of weeks, to be able to claw their team out of it with his arm, because he's talented enough to do that, and it just didn't happen. So I'm starting to wonder if there's sort of handcuffs on him right now offensively, with Jim Harbaugh being his head coach. So I don't know, maybe those handcuffs come off at some point, but honestly, I don't know if it's going to happen. But that's just me speculating. Honestly, I think the Chargers are going to be just fine. They're going to compete for a playoff spot this year, most likely, and their defense is fairly good. So I think that they actually have a shot to be pretty good this year, but time will tell. Denver Broncos. Okay. So you just beat the Bucs by double digits on the road. Huh? Bucs, what happened? This is the same team. This is the same team that just beat the Lions, who I said was going to be the number 1 seed in the NFL. They were going to have the best record in the NFL this year. You just beat the Lions, and then you immediately turn around and lose by 19 points at home to the Denver Broncos. Honestly, this is just another example that sometimes football just makes no sense. The passing game was completely irrelevant. Baker Mayfield was sacked 9 times and threw for 4.9 yards per completion. There was absolutely no downfield threat whatsoever. The Broncos did whatever they wanted, and that's pretty much it. Part of me kind of wants to just throw this away, like I said for the Texans earlier, losing to the Vikings, but this is a bit different in that you lost to the Broncos. The Broncos. But it is just one game. You're probably fine if you're the Bucs, but this has got to be a little bit disheartening at the very least. All right, moving on from Battle of the Mid with the Steelers and the Chargers to Battle of the Basement, Panthers and Raiders. Let's start with the Panthers. Man, you gotta be kidding me, Panthers. So the Panthers, they got a huge win. They scored 36 points, which is more points than they'd scored the entire first 2 weeks combined. This has to be the worst case scenario if you are Bryce Young. I literally cannot come up with a worst case scenario, football-wise, than what happened on Sunday for Bryce Young. I know that all of the Bryce Young stands out there, if there are any left, were probably hoping that Andy Dalton would go out there and be just as bad as Bryce Young has been, because that would, in a weird kind of transition property way, prove that it was not Bryce Young's fault that they were bad. But that's not only not what happened, the complete opposite happened, where Andy Dalton went out there and played better than he has in years in the exact same offense that Bryce Young has been told to run for the last 2 years. And at this point, I know it's just 1 week, but if Andy Dalton does this, or at least something resembling not terribleness at quarterback, Bryce Young may not see the field. And if that does happen, Dalton may have 2 or 3 weeks in a row where he's not great. And then they may go with Bryce Young at that point. But at this point, I've seen enough to where, unless Andy Dalton has 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even 4 straight weeks of terrible, Bryce Young will not see the field for the rest of this season. And then after that, and the Raiders. So, you beat the number 1 seed from last week. That's who you beat. You beat the Ravens last week. So, one of the best teams in the NFL, number 1 seed in the playoffs last year. You beat those guys last week. And then this week, you lost to the 32nd seed. So, the worst team in the NFL by a lot this week. Okay, Raiders. Yep, you're the Raiders. That's for sure. All right, another blowout here. Unfortunately, the Seahawks and Dolphins. Let's start with the Seahawks. A 3-0 start for the Seahawks, albeit against not so great competition at this point. But I will say, for all those folks out there who said that they would only win 5, maybe 6 games, you guys must be feeling pretty crummy right now, given their 3-0 start. Again, albeit against not great competition. And as you can tell, I was not one of those people that thought that. They have 3 legit weapons on offense that could be number 1s on most other teams in the NFL. And they have a much more aggressive defense this year than they have in the past. And so I actually think that they could sustain a reasonable level of success this year where they could win 10 or 11 games. And at this rate, that may be good enough to win the division because of all of the myriad of injuries that everybody else in their division has been suffering over the last couple of weeks with the 49ers and the Rams specifically. And yeah, the Miami Dolphins just look like a team that has absolutely no heart anymore. And honestly, I don't really blame them considering what happened to Tua. Now, I know quarterbacks get injured all the time, but this wasn't just an injury. There was immediate talks that the guy who was supposed to lead them to a Super Bowl, the highest paid quarterback in franchise history, yada, 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 yada. And by the way, just a guy that everybody loved on that team. He may never play football again. That's a lot different than, just losing your quarterback for a certain number of weeks. This is a man whose livelihood and thing that he loves the most outside of his family is possibly taken away from him for good. That is really, really disheartening, and I don't blame these guys if they feel like their season's been taken away from them and the soul and life has been sucked out of that locker room. I honestly would not blame them. Plus, once again, moving on from the just the tragedy of the Tua stuff, their defense is really, really bad. I said this at the beginning of the season that their defense was going to take a huge step back, and it has. Obviously, they still have good pieces, Javon Holland, Jalen Ramsey, just to name a couple, but right now, their front 7 looks abysmal, and that's where they lost a lot of their talent, and guess what? They aren't as good as they were, and that makes perfect sense to me. They may have a worse record than the Patriots at the end of the season if Tua doesn't come back. I don't know, which would be a crime shame given how potent their offense is. This was a very fun game. Ravens and Cowboys. Let's start with the Ravens. A much needed win. I would argue that no team needed to win more this past weekend than the Ravens, other than maybe the Jets, just because of what the Patriots kind of do to them on a regular basis and the fact that it was their first game at home. But I would still argue Ravens probably needed it a little bit more, considering they were 0-2 and the Jets were not. So this is a good win for them on the road, and hopefully this is going to get them a little bit more back on track in terms of, where their season's going to be going towards. Obviously, their division is not that great. The Steelers are 3-0, but everybody else is pretty bad right now. So they still have a really good shot of winning the division, and I do think that they will eventually catch up to the Steelers once the Steelers start playing a little bit better competition on a regular basis. And of course, the Ravens will have 2 opportunities to actually beat the Steelers themselves, which I think that they will twice. So we'll see where they eventually land, but I don't see any reason why the Ravens won't be one of the best teams in the AFC when the year is over, as long as they can catch up to the Steelers and actually beat them when they play each other. And as for the Cowboys, 274 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground? Really? Is that honestly the best that you can do? I picked Micah Parsons to be the Defensive Player of the Year this year, and honestly, he has been a complete non-factor through 3 games. Now, of course, it's not all his fault. He's getting double and triple teamed pretty much every play, and the reason is because they have nobody else on that defensive line that's actually good at pass rushing this year for some reason. He did actually get the singular quarterback hit last week for the Cowboys, so I guess I can't be too mad at Micah Parsons, but right now their pass rush is completely and utterly irrelevant, and I'm not really sure how the Cowboys fix it. They don't have a lot of money to go out and just sign guys or trade for guys or anything like that. Maybe you could buy low on somebody that, is on a really terrible team that they're just trying to sell. But I think that they should have gone out and got Matt Judon. That was the team that I was actually thinking should do that. But of course, it ended up being the Falcons. But regardless, I said this at the beginning. I don't know how the Cowboys think they're going to make the playoffs this year. They are just not good enough. They're not making the playoffs. Battle of the NFC West, Rams and 49ers. Let's start with the Rams. I said last week I was worried that the Rams are going to go 0-5, 0-6, once Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua come back, but they faced a team that had just about equal opportunity in terms of injury bug, right? Or not opportunity, I would say just equal terribleness in the 49ers this week, and so they were able to pull out a win. And man, every time I watch Matthew Stafford, I respect that man more and more and more. He just has this patient leadership about him where he doesn't really get too fired up with things. He doesn't really, get on to guys if they make a lot of mistakes, especially right now when you're playing your 3rd, 4th, 5th, maybe even 6th best wide receiver on your depth chart because you have so many injuries. You're playing a backup tight end, and you could just see him be so calm all the time. Now, sometimes you do need that rah-rah guy, but I just love watching Matthew Stafford play football, and again, the more I watch him, I just have more and more respect for him every single time. I honestly wish I had that kind of temperament, but that's one of the many reasons why he is in the NFL and I am behind a screen talking about it. 49ers are really struggling right now. They have been bit with the injury bug about as bad as anybody in the NFL outside of, again, maybe the team that they just played with the Rams. And there's an argument to actually be made that they do have it worse than just about everybody else. They are down their top 3, arguably, offensive options in Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle. I said last week, at least they have George Kittle. Apparently George Kittle got hurt in their last game too because he didn't play this weekend either. They also have a host of other injuries on their defensive side of the football, for instance, Dre Greenlaw being one of them. So there's a lot of different injuries that the 49ers are going through. This was still a winnable game for them because, again, the only team that's kind of in that conversation for injuries that I can think of right now is the Rams, and yet the 49ers still could not pull this one out. I hope that they get healthy soon. I hope they both, the Rams and the 49ers, honestly, get healthy very soon, because these are 2 really good teams in that NFC West and just in the NFC in general, and I'd like to see the best teams be in the playoffs, and I don't know if they can't get their weapons back, especially the 49ers, how they survive this year. Lions, Cardinals are up next. Let's start with the Lions. A nice bounce-back win for them after a tough loss against Tampa Bay, who lost again to the Broncos. this weekend. I'll get over it. I swear I will. The ground game really carried them in this one, and I'm gonna say something that probably is gonna be a bit unpopular. I don't really hear anybody else talking about it, so just kind of keep it between us here. I'm starting to get a little bit worried about Jared Goff. Look, I know he's probably going to be fine, but he hasn't looked the greatest to start this season. He's got more interceptions than touchdowns. He's got the best offensive line in all of football, in my personal opinion. He's got 2 great running backs. He's got minimum 2 really good wide receivers, and the tight end that broke like all of the rookie records last season. He's got plenty of opportunity and options to go to be great, but he just hasn't played well. And this may be just like a little bit of PTSD talking, but I've seen enough bad Jared Goff football to be worried that he's just gonna go back to that bad football. He'll probably be fine. I recognize that he will probably be fine. And I'm probably just having that PTSD get to me. But it is there. And I'm starting to get a little worried about it. Despite this loss, the Arizona Cardinals looked pretty okay in this one. They honestly just couldn't run the ball. That was their fatal flaw. And yeah, maybe you could say, well, they couldn't run the ball, so they didn't look all that good. Fair play. But they didn't look too bad in this one. Their defense played pretty well. Kyler Murray looked decent in this one as well. So, they played a really, really good team, too. We can't forget that. They played the Detroit Lions, who, again, I think had the best team in the NFL coming into the season. So for me, I'm not really too worried about this one. They played them tough, and again, I'm not going to get too down if I'm Arizona for losing to the Lions. Alrighty, folks, here goes nothing. Another Kansas City Chiefs win and another ref controversy. Yay! Honestly, it's starting to get really annoying to talk about this because I feel like we've been talking about it for 3 years, but the Kansas City Chiefs just basically get every call ever, and it's really starting to bug a lot of people, including me. This isn't the only reason that the Falcons ended up losing this game, or vice versa, that the Chiefs ended up winning this game, but a ball to Kyle Pitts in the end zone, there was clear defensive pass interference. I don't remember who was covering Kyle Pitts. I think it was one of the backers. It might have been Nick Bolton. I don't remember, but it was clear pass interference. Like, not even remotely close. There's a still image of the ball about 30 feet away from Kyle Pitts as he's reaching for it, and he's literally getting tackled in the end zone with the ball 30 feet away, and yet no call. So last week, there was pass interference for the Chiefs, on their last drive that ended up having them win the game. And then this time, they're on defense, and they don't get a very clearly similar call. It's starting to get ridiculous. However, the Falcons did go for a 4th and 1 and had one of the worst play calls I've ever seen in my life on a 4th and 1 to lose the game. So it wasn't all on the refs, clearly, but again, I'm saying this again, that the refs helped the Chiefs win a game down the stretch on the last or second to last drive of the game, and it's really, really starting to bug me. As for the Falcons, again, they definitely should have won this game. I watched a good portion of it. I didn't end up watching all of it, but I watched a good portion of it, and the portions that I saw, the Falcons thoroughly outplayed the Chiefs. Now, then again, I may not have just gotten the full picture, but regardless, I think the Falcons had a better game than the Chiefs did. I think they outplayed them, but when you're playing against the Chiefs and the refs, it's kind of hard for you to win if you make any mistakes. Well, this game was a disaster. Let's start with the Bills. Pure, utter domination by the Bills. They basically played a college team out there this weekend. They did everything well, and if they keep playing like this, if they put everything together like they did this week consistently, then they could make a Super Bowl run this year. That's how well they played. But, again, it was against the Jaguars, so I'm not really sure that it actually will be sustainable. Alright, it's officially disaster time in Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence absolutely stinks right now. He stunk for the first 2 weeks, and he stunk again this week. He had one of the worst interceptions that I have ever seen, and definitely maybe the second worst interception this year, because that Will Levis pick in week 1 was just hilariously bad. But he overthrew his receiver by about 19 yards on like an in, I think, or a crosser route or something, where he literally just fired it like as it, like say the guy was running a 10-yard in, right? He threw it as if he was running an 18-yard in or a 20-yard in. Like he just bombed it over his head to a defensive back that was like 20 yards downfield from where his nearest receiver was. Terrible, terrible throw. If you haven't seen the video of it, you should go look it up. It's pretty bad. And at this point, you probably do have to consider benching Trevor Lawrence for Mac Jones, which, honestly, in football terms, that is a fate worse than death. Oh, and their defense looked absolutely terrible in this one as well. So that doesn't help either. But when your offense is super terrible and your defense plays super terrible, guess what? You lose by 30 plus. It's a Jane Daniels party. It's a Commanders party. It just doesn't have a good ring to it. A coming out party for the Washington Commanders and specifically Jayden Daniels. He looked sensational. If you look at the statistics of it, it's not like it just jumps out. It's not like he threw for 400 yards and ran for 150 or something, but he was in complete control. Only 2 incompletions and 3 total touchdowns. So more total touchdowns than he had incompletions in this one. He looked like he was in complete control of the offense from start to finish. And honestly, he looked like he was in complete control of the game from start to finish. And I think other than maybe Malik Nabers, I would say Jayden Daniels is the favorite for Rookie of the Year right now. This loss for the Cincinnati Bengals is solely on the defense. They played absolutely terrible. I mean, watching that, it looked like they just had no idea how to cover any of the weapons that the Commanders have. And listen, I love Scary Terry. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL, and he's so underrated because he's played for a team that's historically been terrible. But it's not like they have an offense that is going to break worlds, right? Like, they have an average offense, I would say, in terms of the totality of weapons that they put together, especially after they traded a few guys from their offense this season to actually get worse. But anyways, the Commanders looked great. The Bengals didn't know what to do on defense. And I've actually heard people on Twitter and on some, radio shows and talk shows say that Joe Burrow let his team down this weekend and he was the reason or one of the main reasons for their loss. I don't really know how anybody can come to that conclusion. So he's only the second quarterback this year to have a game where he throws for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. They didn't punt the entire game. The offense literally scored every single possession that they had the ball. And Joe Burrow did not turn the football over. And they scored 33 points. But somehow Joe Burrow is the reason that they lost the game? I'm sorry, next argument, because that one makes absolutely no sense to me.